up, YouTube? Welcome back. It's a foggy morning here in Florida, and today we're going to be diving the confluence. Now, confluence is where two or more bodies of water mix together. And in this case, it's the Tannic waters of an ancient river and the crystal clear waters of Florida springs. And when these water bodies mix together, you can see blues, greens, yellows, oranges. It's an amazing rainbow of colors. And sometimes it's just a couple defined layers of colors. Sometimes it's all mixed and swirling together. And then other times the river completely overpowers the spring and browns it out. We're gonna see the full spectrum today. But I'm gonna get suited up, wait for this fog to burn off. So I hope you guys enjoy the video, and I'll see you out there. Just gotta unbuckle my precious cargo real quick. The sun right there is trying to come out. I think it's about to break through the clouds, so we're good to go. This kayak cost $10 million. And I'm just getting to a sphere on the side of the road. All right, sun is out. Gonna grab my gear, get in. So some Florida springs, the runs are protected. It's just for a good reason. You're not allowed to swim in them in order to protect aquatic vegetation and wildlife, things like that. That's the case at this spring, but I'm just gonna be sticking to the river, so we're all good. Got a dive flag, pretty boats pass by. But yeah, gonna get in and check out this confluence. As I slipped beneath the surface, I was immediately swallowed in a world of glowing red. The visibility wasn't great at all, as there was a lot of stirred up silt, but I struck off through the tea-stained void in the direction of the confluence. It felt like the dark red waters went on forever, but suddenly a faint window of blue appeared in the distance, and as I swam through a final veil of tannic water, a stunning aquascape materialized in front of me. To be honest, I was kind of speechless. I've seen some unbelievable things underwater, but this was beauty on an entirely different level. The crystal waters of the spring tumbled over the top of the silty Tannic River in a violent collision of blue and amber. To my disbelief, a manatee emerged from the spring run and drifted into the confluence. I watched carefully as it rose to the surface to take a breath before sinking into the rolling clouds of silt. At the same time, I noticed a huge congregation of very large fish hovering just below the spring water. As I swam closer, I realized it was a variety of enormous snook, long-nosed gar, and grass carp. The fish dispersed as I approached and suddenly vanished beneath the cloudy river water. I dove down to try and follow the gar into the silt, but I couldn't really see anything. As I popped back out of the river water, I noticed a large gray reflection on the surface in the distance. The manatee had returned. Apparently, it wasn't ready to leave the thermal refuge of the spring on this chilly morning. I filmed as the manatee swam from the cold river water up into the relatively warm spring run. I've envisioned the sight of a manatee bursting from tannic waters into blue spring water in my head so many times, I was totally beside myself witnessing this moment firsthand. Now that the manatee was back in the spring, I swam out in the open above the confluence. It was like floating above a massive wall of cumulonimbus clouds. As I swam back and looked at the actual meeting point of the confluence, the silted river water looked just like a brooding thunderstorm, welling on the horizon in stark contrast to the blue skies of the spring water. The occasional glint of sunlight hitting fish scales flashed like lightning, arcing between the tumbling swirls. I swam back into it and watched as the colors enveloped me. The mixing waters also reminded me of deep space images of a nebula, the interstellar cosmic dust and gas of exploded stars. I might as well have been on another planet, but this is just the profound beauty of Earth's freshwater systems doing their thing. I spun in a circle on the surface in a futile attempt to soak everything in. You ever feel like you aren't physically, emotionally, or mentally capable of appreciating something sufficiently? Well, I felt like that. I decided to follow along the shoreline a little ways as I noticed the spring water was bleeding up along it, creating a narrow pathway of clear water. A huge school of what I think are red-eyed chub hovered in the shallows. This meeting of two different freshwater systems seemed to have created an edge habitat effect that was attracting an abundance of life. In the distance, I recognized the familiar pointy shape of a chain pickerel. These predatory fish are quite shy, and I sadly wasn't able to get very close, but still flashed its beautiful patterned scales at me as it swam by and dipped into the river water. I turned around and followed right down the line of the confluence, with the left half of my body in 72 degrees Fahrenheit spring water and the right half of my body in the frigid river water. The confluence isn't just a physical phenomena. It's a specific rare habitat type that's important for biodiversity and the health of freshwater ecosystems. As I crossed back over the main area of the confluence, keeping an eye out for any more gar, the buttressed base of an old cypress tree caught my eye. The sun was shining directly behind it, scattering wild light beams through the water on either side. It was a wonderfully vertical scene of light and root, and even some minnows were dancing in the rays. I noticed a big head poking out of the side of the cypress tree. As it got closer, a large bowfin emerged from the roots, and I followed it as it slowly disappeared down the slope into the river water. In the distance, I saw a tight-knit school of mullet were hovering above the heart of the confluence. I wanted to get closer to them before they disappeared up the spring run, so I held my breath and dived down into the river water. It was a little spooky as I couldn't see well and vague shapes of fish peeled off to the side as I went through with my camera, but as river water gave way to spring water, a stunning window of clarity opened up in front of me.
That has to be the craziest underwater aquascape I've ever seen. That was so beautiful. Holy cow. All right, well, I'm gonna paddle back to the car. That's one spring down, 2 more to go. Now, if you think I'm gonna change out of my wetsuit in between each spring, then you're crazier than I am. So driving in between springs in a wetsuit, it is. Spring number 2, let's get it.
Right off the bat, I could tell we were dealing with a much greener spring. The sunlight and a few great big cypress trees created some very dramatic shadows at the head spring. Unfortunately, this spring is in the same spring shed as the dying spring from my last video, and it's also struggling with groundwater contamination and algae. The green haze made for slightly reduced visibility, but was still fairly decent, and I was able to see a school of mullet swim past in the distance. I found one of the spring vents and dove down a short ways into it. Algae danced as the water flowed up from the limestone crack, and sunfish swam all around me. But enough of the head spring, it was time to find another confluence. I followed the edge of the flooded cypress forest down the spring run. The harsh light and deep shadows create a pretty eerie environment for it being nearly midday, but I pressed on. Submerged cypress knees jutted up from the bottom of the run. They were pretty cool to look at. Eventually, I began to see signs of the confluence. It was much more subtle at this spring. Instead of vibrant swirling colors and clouds, there was a thin layer of river water laying flat beneath the spring water, like different colored blankets laying on top of one another. There were quite a few huge bass in the area, and they kept randomly appearing from the flooded forest in the layer of river water. Since Florida springs are about 72 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, the position of the river water in the confluence swaps depending on its temperature. If the river water is below 72 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll sink beneath the spring water. If the river water is warmer than 72 degrees Fahrenheit, it will rest above the spring water. This is because cold water is more dense than warm water. You know, basic physics, the good stuff. And since it's winter right now, the river water is quite a bit colder than the spring, hence the thin layer along the bottom. dove down, and it was weird to stick my hands into the cold layer of river water. Here you can pretty clearly see the layers of water peel away as I let my camera slowly rise from the bottom up to the surface. Since the visibility wasn't the best and I was solo, I didn't want to push too much farther out to the river, so I turned back but explored a bit of the flooded cypress forest on my way. Scattered fields of cypress knees was a curious sight. It wasn't really like anything I'd seen before. This is a place I'd definitely like to come back to and explore more thoroughly when I'm not alone. There were some truly massive cypress trees, and even my fisheye lens was struggling to capture its size. I mean, just look at the width of that trunk. And on my way back to the headspring, I came across a big old cooter hiding in the algae. He checked me out, and then took off into the distance, right between the layered spring water and river water. So, spring number 2, done in the books. It wasn't as a defined wall of confluence where the two different waters mixed. It was neat to kind of see it just kind of creeping along that bottom level, just like a foot deep of river water. Yeah, that's pretty neat. It was cool to kind of sneak back into the cypress knees and the cypress forest and see the light just kind of coming around all the vegetation. It's pretty neat. But that's about it for here. It's time to head to our final destination, so I'll see you guys there. Check this out. They don't see or hear very well, but he's busy looking for worms. All right, one last dive. Not gonna lie, it's not looking too promising here. The river is about 1.5 feet higher than I normally like it to be when I come to this particular spot. Some scuba divers said it's black all the way down. I'm gonna get in, give it a whirl, but I might not be hitting those rainbow confluence colors at this spring. But okay, again, see what we can find. So here goes nothing. I dove into the dark water and swam away from the steps and out over the main vent of the spring. It's a 70-foot drop to the bottom, which was nowhere in sight. When the river is low, I can easily see all the way down, but not today. Spring flow has a lot to do with pressure. When the river level rises due to rainfall, the increased volume of water puts pressure on the spring and can reverse the direction of flow back into the spring, causing a brownout. In this area, brownouts are a natural occurrence. At this point, I wasn't hopeful I'd see much, but then a familiar, long, slender shape caught my eye in the distance. 2 long-nosed gar had journeyed into the browned-out spring. As gar are primarily fish eaters, I imagine the murky waters help to conceal them as they hunt. I followed them around for a little bit as they swam through the sunbeams, but it wasn't long before they evaded me and my camera and disappeared into the Tannic distance. I did what I could to see if there was any bit of spring water creeping out into the river. Based on what the scuba divers had told me, I imagined the actual confluence was deep down underground somewhere. There were some areas that seemed clearer than others, but that likely just had to do with how shallow it was. But it was still neat to see how the light pierced through the down branches along the bank, and there was a handful of wildlife hanging out in between them all. The vague shape of a bowfin took form and then quickly darted away below me. I would dive down and not really know what I might find. I kind of just kept stumbling across things. First it was the gar, then this bowfin, and then I happened upon these 2 cooters. I could barely see them along the bottom, and they too disappeared into the murk. I thought perhaps the spring water might be forming a thin layer on the surface, but again, the river and spring must be mixing together deep underground, as it didn't seem much clearer. At this point, I didn't think I was going to find anything else of note. I floated over the 70-foot deep section of the spring and looked down at the light rays stabbing into the murky abyss below me. I wanted to at least dive down 20 feet or so to check out the vent and look back to the surface, so I calmed my heart rate, took a deep breath, and plunged downward. I could see better than I thought I'd be able to. When I was satisfied with how deep I had gone, I looked up and couldn't believe what I saw. There in the amber darkness was a nearly 100-pound alligator snapping turtle clinging to the wall of the spring. My lungs were burning at this point, and I shot back up to the surface in total disbelief. The odds of an alligator snapping turtle being in a spring, let alone me randomly diving down precisely on top of where it was, are insane. I really couldn't believe my luck and was totally beside myself with excitement. I tried rather unsuccessfully to calm my heart rate again, grabbed a breath, and then dove back down into the spring. I knew roughly where the turtle was, but I was kind of diving blind until I could reach the limestone features. But sure enough, there he was in all his ancient glory. There were even silhouettes of sunfish and chub suckers swimming about in the spring above him. Although everything kind of looks yellow, green, and brown down here, this subspecies of alligator snapper is known for its vibrant yellow head, and you can just barely make out the colors. This particular subspecies was actually just listed as threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2024 and is only found in this river basin. It used to be abundant throughout its range, but overhunting for turtle soup in the mid to late 1900s caused them to near the brink of extinction. Hopefully the new protections will have a positive impact for these prehistoric-looking beasts, but they mature slowly and have low reproduction rates, so it will take some serious time for a significant recovery to occur. I held out as long as I could to get the shots before my stilly little lungs told me some oxygen would be kinda nice, and I had to shoot back up to the surface. I was completely out of breath, but I was not lacking in stoke. I couldn't have asked for a better way to end the day, and I headed up and out the stairway.
Oh man, I know that they live in this river, but man, they never come to the springs. And to just be lucky enough to dive down and see him just on the ledge that I happened to be diving on. Oh my gosh, that was unbelievable. Oh man, with the murky light and all the fish up above him. Oh, so good. I'm so glad I got in. Oh man, that's awesome. You never know what wonderful, beautiful things are hanging out down there in this kind of first glance, just pitch black brown water. But man, what a world down there. Good grief. It's so cool. Just goes to show how much these ecosystems can fluctuate and regularly fluctuate. It's totally natural for it to brown out every now and then. But man, I know people like seeing that clear water, but there's still plenty of wonders to be found, even when it looks pretty poopy. All right, that's it, you guys. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.